The share screen did not actually open up for me.
Maybe we'll put you as a presenter.
Oh, that's a good idea. By the way, if anybody comes in now because you started the recording, they will
Hear us?
hear you. Yeah.
Try now, Brian.
Yeah. It's looking good.
There we go. Hello, everyone. We're just going to give 1 more minute to allow some people to come in, and then we will start the webinar. All right, good afternoon and good morning to all of you who are attending this webinar today. My name is Andrew Lewin, and I am part of the Questica Customer Success team here at Questica Budget. I will be facilitating this webinar today on the nonprofit budget team's advantage in times of uncertainty. Today, we will be hearing from Brian Walker, our sales director here at Questica. Brian has been working with nonprofit organizations for over 20 years. This work has included ERP and budget and solution implementations, consulting, and accounting work for hundreds of organizations across North America. Brian has a wealth of knowledge around the budgeting process, challenges nonprofits face in facilitating an effective and efficient budget process, and how technology solutions can be leveraged to alleviate those challenges. So I'm very excited that you'll be hearing from Brian today. If we can just go to the next slide, please. Wonderful. So here's the agenda that we're going to be going through today. Feel free if you have any questions, or you're going to hear obviously a little bit about Questica, the challenges that Brian's going to take you through that are facing nonprofits today, and his presentation on the solution to that problem. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to put them in the questions box just on the right panel on your right-hand side. And then also you can, if you have anything to say, you can just put it in the chat. If you're liking what you see, we'd love to hear your reactions to this. If you identify with any of the challenges that you face that are identified here, please let us know. We'd love to hear from that just in the chat box. That's like, yes, I'm facing those too. Maybe add some that maybe we've missed. We'd love to hear from you in that respect. Okay, here's a little bit about Questica Budget. Now, I've had the pleasure to work here at Questica for the past 3.5 years. Wonderful company. We have over 900 customers in North America, some beyond North America as well. 100% of the nonprofit sector budgeting focus, and then our only vendor with 20+ years in business. So it's quite the company. We have a great culture here. It's wonderful to work. We enjoy working with our customers. For me, as part of the Questica customer success team, I really enjoy working, making sure that our customers are using the software to its full capabilities, engaging with them. It's a lot of fun, especially with our nonprofit side. It's really great to see what you guys are working on, the great work that you are doing through your nonprofit as well as through your budgeting. So it's always great to hear for that. Okay, now you're going to hear, enough from me, you're going to hear from Brian Walker. Brian, it's off to you.
All right, thanks, Andrew. I think we're going to do a quick audience poll before we jump into the rest of the presentation. So we just want to get a little feedback. Let's see. Are you going to launch that here real quick?
There you go. So can everybody see that poll? Just say in the chat if you can see it.
Yeah, it looks like we're getting some feedback there.
Great. So what level of collaboration is currently employed in your budgeting process? Love to hear that. We'll give you approximately 20 more seconds. Okay, there we go. All right. So we'll just share those. Great. Obviously, currently include program managers in the process. Perfect.
Yeah, that's typically what we would expect to see with a lot of the nonprofits is either they're attempting to include the people that are closest to the budgeting process, which would be the program managers, or they would like to, and maybe don't have the right tools for that process. It can be tough if you don't have the right tools and how you're going to organize your data and have a distributive collaborative process. And that's kind of what we're seeing here. It's one of the two. 80% are including the program managers currently, 20% don't include, but they would like to, and nobody answered that they don't wish to include the program managers. So I think that's along the lines of what we see quite often. Thanks for your
Perfect.
feedback there. All right, that helps inform me as I go through some of the other topics here a little bit, kind of where you guys are coming from with that perspective. So let's jump into things a little bit. All right, we're going to talk about budgeting, some of the current challenges. I think the challenges will also be pretty common across the group. What do we typically see? What we offer as a solution, go through some of it. There's certainly in this time we have here today, we can't go through all of it, but we'll touch on a few key areas. So what does your budget process currently look like? Is it something like what you see here? Tons of different Excel spreadsheets, different versions of those, no real control over the process. Can be tough to consolidate those together. Excel is great for certain things. It's great for manipulating numbers. It's not great necessarily as a storage container for those numbers, a permanent storage container. How do you get the data integrated to that? Have you developed something, just sort of ad hoc within your organization? You have to do a lot of cutting and pasting, or do budget owners not really have access to the information that they need? Is it challenging to navigate? It's not really a database where you can follow links through and drill down to the different levels of information. How do you do version control? Some of these different things. Does it facilitate collaboration in a very good manner? How do you get the supporting details together? And then ultimately, do you have errors within that process? I've certainly seen this myself many years ago in my very first accounting job. Actually still in college, not even out of college yet. I was working for an organization. They had a huge error, like a $13 million error on their budgeting process, which at that time was certainly all in Excel. There was very few budgeting tools back in those days. And so they handed it over to me, strictly because I knew how to navigate Excel pretty well. Not that I had any budgeting knowledge whatsoever, but that was just really the nature of where we were at back then. Nowadays, we have some other options. We don't have to rely on Excel. So that's what we're here to talk about a little bit. So Questica Budget, it's a cloud-based budgeting solution. Some of the key sort of high-level benefits of that, it has a modern user interface. We have integrations, so this allows you to bring all your data together, bring in the GL data in, bring in the HR data in, other statistical medical billing information in there. What do you need to drive your budget information and give the users access to the results throughout the year that they need to see? It's a very flexible tool. So what do we mean by this? We have the ability to rename the fields in the solution to your naming conventions. Do you call things departments or cost centers? You have activity codes, grants you're budgeting for. So what does that structure look like? We can rename these fields. If we don't have a field out of the box, we can add a field for that. And that's not through customization. That's just through some of the standard configuration tools in the system. What does that field need to look like? Is it a drop-down list for the user to choose from, like a list of your different grants? Is it a checkbox, yes, no? Is it a text field where the user's going to type in some descriptive information? Is it a required field? Is it optional? So through all the different views that we look at throughout the system, just keep in mind that we can add fields to those. We can rename the fields, make it match what your users are used to working with, the types of names and conventions. Has a very consistent layout across the organization. So if you get familiar with the way the screens look, you'll know where to find things as you navigate from one place to the next. Modern web-based architecture, overall intuitive and easy to learn. And all of this leads to user adoption. And that's really what we want. We want a tool that's going to be used. It's going to be, people are going to like using it. They're going to find the information without getting frustrated. If you have a great tool, but nobody's using it, it obviously doesn't do you much good. Now, moving on from there into some of the very specific functions and features of the tool, the leaders across these nonprofit organizations, they need the specific features to do the work that they have to get to. One of the big elements that goes with that is tracking the budgets as they go through different stages. So workflow with budget approval stages. We can tailor these within the tool to what stages your data needs to follow, who has access to the data at those different stages. Personnel budgeting is always going to be a huge one within nonprofit, of course. So getting the staffing budgets right. What level of detail do you want to deal with? Budgeting for all your different positions, which employees occupy those, what are the key drivers of the taxes and benefits, and how are they allocated across the organization? Administrative cost allocations, very flexible tool in the system for capturing your shared costs, your administrative costs. How do they allocate out to the different programs and grants? Is it based on statistical information, such as number of FTEs, square footage? Is it based on direct budget dollars, like just salaries, total expenses, whatever might drive those allocations? Grant budgeting, as I've mentioned a couple of times, this allows you to shift your focus from the program to the grant side. They're all interconnected. So as you're budgeting within a program, you're certainly pushing dollars into the grants. But from the grant side, you have a central view of that grant, might fall on a different timeline than your organization's fiscal year. It has its own indirect cost rates that drive the calculations there, and you're pushing the dollars back into the programs. Calculations, very flexible for organizations that have fee-for-service type of programs. Certainly see this a lot in healthcare. It might be membership-based organizations on the healthcare, health and human services side. What are the projected client visits looking like? What are the different payer types? Setting up the rates as global variables. How do you want to do all those projections at that level? We can create unlimited budget versions. This is very useful as you're going through the initial budget stages and just doing different what if versions. What does it look like if we apply a 3% cost of living adjustment? But as you get into the year further, you can use those different budget versions for your current year projections. So also sometimes referred to as forecasts. Current year projection would typically have year-to-date results, the actuals populated across those months, the remaining months of budget, and we can set algorithms to inform those remaining months. So a couple of examples. For this set of accounts, I would like the system to keep the annual budget number that we established the same. So based on the year-to-date results that we have, the algorithm will adjust the remaining budget months and maintain that annual number. So these are the numbers we would have to hit in order to still get to that annual number. For other types of line items, maybe you want it to base the remainder month projection off of historical actuals or historical budget trends. So you can determine that based on different ranges of accounts. That informs your remaining months. Then the users can go through and participate in the process and give their feedback on that, either in terms of adjusting those numbers for the remainder months or based on variance analysis with explanations. So we can set up criteria in a very easy to navigate view where you can designate anything that's off of actual versus budget or different budget versions off of the variance by X percentage or by amount is going to require some type of explanation. And this would flow through to the users in the form of a task. Take a look at these tasks. They relate both to the budget approval stages and also to this explanations functionality. It would flow through to that user. They have a task assigned. They need to complete the task. In this case, it's looking at those variances, deciding what's causing the variance, and putting their explanation in. So this can all flow up to the levels of leadership across your organization. A number of different collaboration tools. So we're not just getting the numbers in here and seeing how everything aggregates. We're also providing the supporting documentation. We can have discussions across team members. you know, messaging different team members about items they're putting in the budget, attaching documents, putting descriptions in there, all of that type of useful information. We have reporting in the system. Then we also have this tool called Open Book, which is potentially external to just your teams. Could be to the board. It could be actually opened up to the public. Allows your data to be represented in a very easy to navigate visual representation with stories and narrative around the numbers. And later this year, we also have a full digital budget book that is going to be updated and released. All right, so those are some of the key elements that we're working with in this tool that facilitate not only the budget process initially as you go into a year all the way through board approval, but some of the tools you're using throughout the year to maintain the budget projections and so forth. All right, another quick audience poll that we have up here. Andrew, if you want to launch that real quick. All right, so this one is around how many budget versions do you create during the year? A few different options. Is it one and done, just the one board approved? Do you do mid-year revisions? Is it monthly with quarterly forecasts? Or again, where are you at now? Where would you like to be? Would you like to do updated forecasts, but it's not currently possible with the tool set that you have? All right, a bit more varied on this one. So just kind of tracking. It looks like some of the group, 38%, does just the one board approved budget. Some do mid-year revisions, about 50% actually, so that's the biggest category. And then 13% do monthly or quarterly forecasts. All right, interesting. So nobody said they would like to do updated forecasts, but not currently possible. All right, thanks for that feedback. So let's move this forward here, more time. And we're gonna jump into the software now and take a look at Questica Budget. How does it facilitate some of what we've been talking about? All right, so let's get in here. This is the Questica Budget application. The landing page as you're in the solution would be the dashboard. So different dashboards can be set up based on your user type. What access do you need? What type of information should be readily available? Moving across the main menus at the top, we're gonna dive into a few key areas. So my tasks, which I had mentioned earlier, this is related to different elements, typically related to the approval process of the budget as it goes through those different stages, but can also be associated with individual budget requests or the variance explanations that we talked about as well. So any given user would receive an email for something that comes into their area of responsibility as a task for them. If they log into the system following that email, they will have a counter here that represents how many tasks they currently have assigned. And this represents a work list. They can just follow the work list. I'm logged in as myself, which I've designated as a reviewer, the finance reviewer of the different cost center budgets that we have in the solution. We also have some individual budget requests, which I'll try to touch upon what those represent as we go through this a little bit more, but basically think of those as itemized requests that flow into the cost centers or flow into capital projects instead of just approving the whole of that cost center. You know, like maybe for your mid-year revisions, you're carrying the budget forward. Anything that's, you know, requested as an addition or maybe a transfer can go in through an itemized request, and then you have an individual pick list you can go through and choose which of those are going to get approved and which might get denied and so forth. So we would go through the process of these types of items. If I'm looking at this under a different user, so just bring in over here a lower level user like Joe. So Joe logs into the system. Joe is a budget owner, like a program manager. So Joe would see his own list here. These are the simple departments that he works on. He also has in here one of the explanations required. So he has something that's out of tolerance on his variances and needs an explanation, and he has one budget request. So per user, that's all going to be varied based on what each user has access to. If we navigate into one of these specific budgets, so these are the working screens where that user is going through that particular department. And we're going to come back and go through some of these specific details. So right now, just kind of focusing on the workflow stages. We can see up here, this sits at the budget entry stage, which is one of 5 different stages that this particular organization goes through. There's a whole menu structure within that department, so you can get into the dashboards of that department, some general information, the budget screens, positions, statistical drivers. As we're working through this data, we've got prior information to inform our budgeting process. How many years of prior actuals do you want available? Prior budget data. How are you choosing to work on those budget inputs? So that's all through the navigation over here. Do we like to work annual across multiple years? Would we rather switch over to a monthly view? All of these choices are informed by the layout options across all of these different screens. So when I mentioned earlier, there's consistency. You have these types of choices across various screens where you can come in, you can choose your own columns. How are the rows grouped? If there's an additional column that I want to throw in here, I would have choices for that. And that's per user, and you can save those in different personalized layouts. All right, so we're going to work through this data and put in our budget entries, and we'll come back and go through some of that. One thing to note though, before we get off the screen, I do want to note that we have accounts within this that we're budgeting for. So within that particular program area. And then we also have grants. So this is looking at things from the program side. As I mentioned earlier, we can kind of shift our view either way. I can put different grants on these line items. And so we're putting the dollars into those grants, or if I want to click into one of the grants, I can now navigate over to this side of things. On the grant screen and have a view central to that grant that we're working in. So just kind of the opposite view of things. So from this side, we would have, again, the different accounts and which cost centers we're pushing that data to. Same type of choices over here. How do you want to work with this? Is it on an annual basis, monthly? The months could follow the timeline of that particular grant and so forth. All right, so going back to our program budget over here, if everything looked good, we had our data in here already, we would simply promote this on to the next stage. So a couple notes about the budget stages. They're up to you as far as how many stages exist in the system. What are you calling those stages? Who has access to those stages? So you're controlling the process. In this case, we're moving it on from the budget entry stage to finance review. So once I did that, if I pass this along, as the budget owner, I could still see the data, but I would no longer have access to go through and make changes to that data. The other thing that's important there is that the system is automatically taking a copy or a snapshot of the data as it passes through each of these stages. So if you ever need to go back and see, okay, what did the entries look like at a particular stage, you can put these all side by side, see the differences. So you're not losing track of what Joe may have done at the budget entry stage versus what the reviewer may have done at a later stage. Okay, so that was just a couple notes on what the budget stages look like. Now moving over from there, let's go to the budgeting menu, which is the main navigation across the solution outside of reports and administration, which is your typical configuration, user roles, integrations, where we set up all that type of information, which is a little bit beyond the scope of what I'm going to get in here today. So on this budgeting menu, we have the solution broken out into the main modules. So on the operating side, in all the different components, capital budgets, personnel, those budget requests. We can also do performance tracking. We can track balances across the grants, funds, all those types of elements. Some of the key items within these, on the operating side, those different budget scenarios or budget versions that I mentioned, you can create unlimited budget versions, copy the data from one to the next. Allocations are a key element over here. Those administrative cost allocations, being able to allocate your positions, statistical inputs and calculations. Those are some of the main elements on the operating side. On personnel, we're going to dive into the positions and then the modifiers, which drive all the calculations for taxes, benefits, cost of living adjustments, and so forth. So those will be kind of the main areas we stick to as we dive into some of these different tools. All right, so let's navigate through. I'm going to go into a specific cost center here from my bookmark option. So we'll go into this healthcare center network. So back to one of the individual programs, just diving a bit deeper into some of the functionality, and then we'll touch upon personnel after this here. All right, so we're currently on the budget screen. There's a couple different screens here where you can either see things rolled up to the account level or the individual budget lines. So what this means is our system allows you to itemize any of your entries. And if you want to just see all those broken out, like I have 5 different things I'm budgeting within this account, so I can list those individually. Each one certainly has its own values, can have its own description, its own attached documents. So all of those different types of elements. You can also get down into the actual cost transactions. So behind any of these values that we see for actuals, if I needed to just pop open the screen and see what exactly did we have, let's just open this on another tab here. So you're going to have all the individual transactions. You can come in here and you can filter any of this data down. So I can see that school corporation account, the descriptions that are coming straight out of the GL, and this is all brought in as part of our integration from your ERP solution. So you can keep those just kind of side by side and help that, or use that to help inform your budget entries out here. All right, so underneath these entries are potentially details. We can either just put in a value, or if we wanted to go in here and start describing each individual entry, we can do it that way as well. We can either budget just by annual, individual months. If we're going to put a new entry in here, we would simply come in, give it the description, how much is it going to be. This is all going to roll into our totals. We have the option of attaching documents. So if we wanted to pull a document in here, link to something outside the system, like maybe you store things on a SharePoint site, so you can just reference that right there. Or you can have discussions across your team members. So if I wanted to come in and ping somebody like Doug here, flag that note, Doug would get an email notification, and we have a discussion going that's tracked on both of our lists of flag notes, and those are the types of items that will pop up when we go to promote this on to later stages. So every entry that goes in the system is getting documented, rolls up into that account level. We're going to have all the information, descriptions, attached documents behind those. Now, other types of entries have calculations behind them. Could be on the revenue side for fee-for-service types of items. One of the big ones is certainly going to be staffing costs. So these would be items where we're not putting those dollars directly in there. We would have a link here. If we have access to this information based on security role, we can drill through that link and see what are the positions. It just moves us from the budget screen over here to the positions. So what are the assigned positions behind this particular program or grant? Within those positions, how are they allocated here? Are they also allocated to grants? If we wanted to navigate into Brett's record here, for example, who's a preschool teacher in this particular area, we can see all the associated calculations for his wages, taxes, and benefits. How do we want to look at that? Is it on a monthly basis? We're going to see the distribution patterns based on your type of setup. Are you bi-weekly, semi-monthly, so forth? Do we want to look at that on an annual basis and the projections across multiple years? So every screen you work on, you have those options. Do you want to work on data annually, look at multi-year projections? Is it just a monthly basis, getting those distribution patterns right across the different months? Now, this is one direction you can go to get into Brett's record. All the drivers for Brett's record would be over here, his allocations in here. So if you needed to change, his salary, his workers' comp code, his starting date and the ending date, any of those typical drivers, you can change those from Brett's record individually, but you might want to shift your focus instead of looking at just a single record. Let's move to the personnel side and look at all of those different types of records on a single grid. So you can kind of go from either direction. If we move over to personnel, so again, you'll see a very familiar type of grid. On this side, it lists that we're now looking at positions for a given version of the budget. So when we create those different budget scenarios or versions, it isolates and segregates this data as well. So we can do a different cost of living adjustment or add some additional positions in another budget version. So same type of information we were looking at individually on Brett's record, but now we have that information across the whole of our organization. So what positions do we have? Which employees are currently filling those positions? How are they allocated to the operating budget? Are they part of a shared or administrative cost allocation? What are those different workers' comp codes? The budgeted salary within these? Do we have increases applied to these on an individual basis and so forth? So this is some of that information that can very much be tailored to your configuration. You know, what information do you need to track to drive your personnel costs? And again, these layouts here can be adjusted. So if there's any, changing of the column order, we can just drag things around. If we wanted to remove a column, add a new column, very easy to do. The whole idea is here is to give you screens that you can work with in the manner that you need to be able to get to your data. Now, another aspect past this layout that's on every screen that I also want to point out is we have the ability to certainly change what you have in front of you on the screen that you're working on, but sometimes it's more efficient to work with this data on a spreadsheet, do some copying and pasting, pull it back into the system. So every screen also has that functionality built in, and that's what we see right next to layout with export and import. So the way you've filtered your data, moved your different columns around, would now be a template for working in a spreadsheet. So if we hit export, what this is really doing is it's creating a spreadsheet with the way you're currently looking at your data. If we then open that spreadsheet, and it's opening on my other monitor over here, we now have that same screen in front of us. To the degree of where there's required choices, like drop-down lists, those are going to be enforced on that spreadsheet. So we can go through and make any changes. Maybe we were pasting in all of our new rates here. Maybe we were removing some records. More likely, we might be pasting some new records. So any of those different types of examples that you're changing, if we simply pull this file back in, there's no need to know anything about how you would map fields or where would I go to import. It's all built right into that particular screen. So we would just select that same file we just created. As we pull that in, the system's going to recognize anything that's new, anything that's updated, or any of the deletions. And we would just go ahead and OK that to finalize the process. Now, that's always one way of getting the data in the system. We can also go through and set up direct synchronizations to your payroll or HRIS system. So it just kind of depends on the volume of total records you have, what types of turnover and changes do you have throughout the year, which is the most beneficial route to go. Now, this is the general position information. One other important element within that for creating the calculations is what we call modifiers. So modifiers are used to drive all of the taxes and benefits, cost of living adjustments, statistical outputs like number of FTEs from that same payroll position information. So if we go into my list of modifiers, you'll note that I have mine sorted by cost output modifiers versus my statistical output modifiers. And you'll see within the statistical outputs, you might need to sometimes break those down into different categories. So I might need to see the direct childcare staff hours versus my total pool of FTEs. Maybe there's certain staff that are part of an occupancy allocation that I've broken out, or maybe I'm looking at staff for number of RNs, filled positions versus open. It's really up to you. You can set very specific criteria on how the data is being output to your budget that allows you to capture not only statistical outputs, but also the cost side. Just to give you a quick example how some of these work. Each modifier has some general information, cost calculation information. Is it driven from the position or the employee? Basic example here would be something like workers' comp is associated with the positions. Doesn't matter which employee is occupying that position, but something like health insurance would be tied to the given employee. So we give you those choices on how you're going to drive the selection of this. Is it a flat amount? Is it a percentage? Something more complex than that? And how are you associating that? A single amount during the year, multiple amounts, and then we would plug the current amounts for any number of years or budget periods into this screen here. So that's going to determine what the current amounts are, but how do we want to let the system know which records this should apply to? So you have these selection criteria here that are very flexible and easy to work with. So we can come through and we can select any criteria here. On this particular one for health insurance for open positions, it's a very specific selection where I'm saying, okay, there is no employee selected with that position. So that field does not have an entry. So that's kind of our definition of what an open position is, right? And the position is one of these types. So only full-time hourly or salaried, on-call part-time, seasonal per diem would not have the insurance plan. So the system knows when we go through and put in a new budgeted open position, we're automatically going to pick up something for health insurance, whatever rate we have in here. We're not just skipping that, versus one of our other filled positions where it has a very specific criteria that they are tagged with that particular plan. All right, so you can choose any of the fields on your record. Sometimes they're based on longevity, like this should only apply after 6 months or a year. Sometimes they might be based on different salary bands and so forth. So very flexible options. Those are what create the calculations, salaries, tax, and benefits, and push those costs into the budget as we were seeing back in our program over here. So these types of options here, salaries, taxes, and benefits, some of them are allocated to different funding sources and so forth. So some other types of options you might see in here, allocated costs, kind of touch upon this as a last item, and then we'll wrap this up. So those again are calculated. So very flexible tools that are determining how these should be allocated out. If we want to follow this, if we have the rights to do so, we can follow this link into the allocation and see, you know, what's the source data? What department are we finding that in? Is it just a single account within that department? Is the whole of the department that we're allocating out? What is the pool of recipients? You know, how are we defining that? Is the allocation based on number of FTEs or square footage or direct expenses? So all of those different parameters help you set up what are the shared costs, how should they be allocated out to our programs and grants in a very flexible and efficient manner. All right, so all of this information is being tracked within the programs and grants. You can also get to that information on global screens. So not limited to just going through each individual program or grant. You can see how everything rolls up. You can filter that down. You can make global changes. Like I want to select the supplies account across every budget, and I need to add another 5% to that, take 10% off the top. So it's got some of those global change options that you can navigate from these same types of screens over here on a global basis. There's also a full set of reports that we can go through. This allows the users to get access to their results throughout the year. There's a full reporting center. Just to give you a quick example of one of these, if I'm a program manager and I need to track my data, I might have something very simple like a year-to-date variance analysis. I can either run this from the system or have this scheduled to show up in my inbox if I want to schedule it out. Each report would have some of its own parameters. Which budget version are you running this against? Some criteria selections. How do you want this to be broken down based on your different programs, locations, divisions? So these types of choices would be based on your chart of account structure and your selections. couple important notes if we're running this. So let's just bring this up here. And then after this, we'll wrap this up with one additional poll question, I believe. All right, so as you're running a particular report, let's maximize this. We've selected how we want the data to be broken out. So I broke it out based on business units, which is kind of a roll up of my different departments or programs. You can kind of think of that maybe sometimes referred to as the division level of an organization. Each page would represent a different business unit. As I'm navigating through these and looking at my year-to-date results, so the annual budget in this case versus year-to-date and what we have left, we can navigate through this based on the hierarchy of your account structure in this case, and see what are the individual categories. As we get down to the actuals at the account level, we can continue drilling down to those individual transactions. So not only do we have access to the individual transactions within the programs as we're doing the budget work, here within any report that references actuals, we can also get into those. So like here for training supplies, we can see what are all the individual transactions, the GL descriptions coming across. Is this a payables or receivables, just a journal entry? So informing the user without having to ask the finance team for that type of information. All of these have the option of certainly being printed, exported to different formats. They will retain their format and look quite nice when they go into those. Okay, so just touching upon some of the different tools of the solution, obviously within the time we had here today. Hopefully that's been helpful for everybody to get a bit of an introduction. So let's bring it back over here, and we'd definitely be happy to, if you have interest and you have a need for a tool like this, to follow up with you further and provide you some more information on some of the other details that we didn't get to in today's look at Questica Budget. So moving from there, we do have, kind of related to that, one more audience poll. So Andrew, if you want to bring that one back up. So this one is just around that exact idea. Do you have interest in learning more about Questica Budget? Could we help you with some of that information? So we saved the easiest one here for last. All right, and thank you for that.
You have about 5 more seconds.
All right.
Okay.
Great. So we can follow up with you and see how we can help you out from there. Now we do have some time that we've allowed to see if anybody has any questions. Just a note that you do have the Q&A option to post your questions in there. So I don't know, Andrew, if you've been monitoring that to see if we have any questions so far.
Yeah, we just have one. I need to leave the webinar early. I imagine the link to the recording will be sent to registrants, correct? Yes.
Yep, I believe so.
And at this point, that's all the questions that people have.
All right. Can hang out for just another few seconds here and see if anybody has any last minute questions. If not, if you're dropping off, we definitely thank you for joining in today. Hopefully this has been helpful, just giving you some ideas of what's possible with the solution. We do have one question popping up here. Good question, actually. So integration with MIP Abila. Yes, we do have integration with MIP. We have some partnerships in the nonprofit space, MIP being one of those, Blackbaud, Sage Intact. So we have out-of-the-box integrations to those, but we've done integrations to some 50 different solutions in total, which would include, NetSuite, Microsoft Dynamics 365. So a lot of different integrations we've done, but we are actually a partner of MIP. Integration with Blackbaud, yes, FBNXT as well. We're a partner of theirs as well. That was another question popping up there.
Okay.
All right. Great. Thanks everybody for joining in. We will follow up with those of you who asked for that, and I hope you all have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.